Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Zando Book Club's Pick panel. My name is Masie Cochran. I'm the editorial director of Tin House and Zando, and I am so happy to be here today with our four brilliant authors to discuss their forthcoming novels, each of which is so singular, vivid, and thought-provoking, a perfect book club pick in every sense. And before we launch into the panel, I would like to thank Penguin Random House and Library Journal for putting together the Winter Book and Author Festival. We are delighted to be a part of this fantastic celebration of books and reading. To kick things off, I'll introduce each one of the authors and their books, ask a short question, and then we'll move to a more general Q&A. First up is Claire Fuller. Claire Fuller is the acclaimed author of Our Endless Numbered Days, which won the Desmond Elliott Prize, Swimming Lessons, Bitter Orange, Unsettled Ground, which won the Costa Novel Award and was shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction, and Memory of Animals. She has an MA in Creative and Critical Writing from the University of Westchester and lives in Hampshire with her husband. Hunger and Thirst is the gripping story about a reclusive sculptor forced to confront her past when a documentary filmmaker begins to investigate an unresolved disappearance linked to her youth. It explores the dangerous line between wanting and needing and how far a person will go to truly belong. And now for our question. Claire, what do you look for in a book club book, and how in your mind does Hunger and Thirst lend itself to lively book club discussion?
Well, first of all, it's great to be here. Lovely to be here. I have a lot of respect and love for librarians and libraries since I'm married to a librarian. But anyway, your question. I'm in a book club that is in a cocktail bar in Winchester, where I live, which, is a great start, really. But I guess, and because I organize it, I'm the one who mostly chooses the books, which is very lovely also. And I suppose I'm always looking for a book that has really great prose, has really great characterization, but also a really strong story. But then, kind of most importantly, something that we can discuss, whether that's some kind of moral question that's controversial, or maybe some ambiguity that so that you could read things in different ways. And really, well, I hope that Hunger and Thirst would make a good book club book. Really, I suppose because it has these ghostly slash supernatural elements, and you could read those either way. You could take it if you're team believer, absolutely as a ghost story, and just get all the chills, I would hope, and all the shivers, and kind of come out at the other end being scared, or something like that. Or you could be team skeptic and see everything that happens through the lens of the main character, Ursula's history and her backstory. So I hope that that would create quite a good debate in a book club.
It definitely created a good debate with me and your UK editor because we were both on different teams, but we were both very scared. Like we were both like very scared by the pros. So that's a great answer. And next up, we have Kyle McCarthy. Hi, Kyle. Kyle is a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop and the author of the novel Everyone Knows How Much I Love You. Her fiction has appeared in the Best American Short Stories, American Short Fiction, and the Harvard Review, and she has received support and grants from the Edward F. Albee Foundation, the Lighthouse Works, and the Elizabeth George Foundation. She lives in Brooklyn, New York. Taut and spellbinding, Immersions follows the aftermath of a celebrated dancer's abrupt decision to quit her company and join a convent, and her younger sister's obsessive conviction that her sister's ex-husband is to blame. A same question to you. What do you look for in a book club book, and what do you think readers of Immersions would be most eager to discuss?
Thank you, Musie, for that introduction, and thank you so much for having me on this panel. Um, the books I most love to discuss with my friends or with my mother are always books where the character's motivation is multi-determined, maybe ambiguous, maybe a little opaque. I love sort of chewing into why people do what they do. I think it's part of why I'm a writer and also part of why I'm a reader. And in Immersions, the two sisters both make choices that I think the reader might have very different opinions about whether it's a good or bad choice. The older sister enters a convent, which takes her away from her dance career and from her family. And is that a good thing to do or not? And then the younger sister is really trying to find out the truth of her older sister's marriage, and whether that quest and the decisions she makes in that quest are the right things to do, and if she's even really clear about why she's so driven to find out, is something that I think readers will enjoy talking about. I hope that it's possible to see it in many different ways.
I love that. That multifaceted way of looking at a single person is always interesting. All right. Alexandria Olivia, born and raised in upstate New York, is the author of The Last One and Forget Me Not. She has a BA in history from Yale University and an MFA in creative writing from the New School. She lives in the Pacific Northwest with her husband, dog, and young son. The Radiant Dark follows the Gerard family over the course of 5 decades as the Earth makes contact with an alien civilization, unfurling a compassionate examination of love, loss, self-discovery, and what it means to live with the knowledge that we are not alone. Hi, Allie. What in your mind makes for an excellent book club pick, and what central themes of the Radiant Dark do you think readers might gravitate toward?
Like everyone else said, thank you for having me. I feel like I'm maybe a little repetitive in my what I'm looking for answer. I'm not a member of a book club. I wish I were, but the books that I really want to talk about often have multiple perspectives. So I really love it when you as a reader see something happen from one character's point of view and then you see it from another's, and just their interpretation is completely different. And especially as time passes, like my book covers about 50 years, so you see people's memories of things evolve and change. So you have two characters who are in like the same room when something happened, and then they're remembering this event in like a completely different way and interpreting it in different ways. And that's the kind of thing I really love talking about in a book. And like Claire said, moral ambiguity, where there's no clear right or wrong, and you can just really get into really feisty conversation about not only like why somebody did something, but if it was the right thing to do, what you would have done in that situation. And then finally, I just love it when you're reading a book and there's like a line that hits really hard and you're like, I have felt that feeling and I've never heard it expressed like that. And that's just perfect. And whenever I'm reading a book and that happens, I just get so excited. I have to be like, who do I know who's read this so I can text them about this line? So that's what I look for. And I think my book has some of that. It feels weird to say that about your own work, but I challenged myself with this one to cover 50 years, multiple perspectives, and it's very much about communication and what people don't say and how actions can be misinterpreted and how someone can be trying their absolute best, but they get it wrong and there's consequences. So I would hope that some of that would spark conversation.
I love that, Allie. Well, it might have been hard for you to say it, but I can attest that it is true because Katie and I texted back and forth favorite lines from the book. So it's something that we were both compelled to do, and I know exactly the feeling that you talk about.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then last but not at all least, Emma Parry. Hi, Emma. Emma Parry is a literary agent in New York. Born in England, she has now lived in America for half her life and championed many admired, beloved, and best-selling authors. She first came across a reference to, quote, the young wife and mother whose loyalist leanings changed the course of a nation in Nathaniel Philbrook's book, Valiant Ambition, a decade ago, and has researched and imagined Peggy's story in every off hour since. She spends her time between New York City and the Hudson Valley. Miss Benedict Arnold pulls back the curtain on the most famous act of treason in American history, shining light on the woman behind the man, begging the question, when uncertainty and bloodshed are the only constants, how far will one woman go for safety? And then Emma, same question, qualities you look for in a book, and what do you think readers of Miss Benedict Arnold will love to discuss?
Well, first I'll say a quick hello and thank you to librarians. I wrote and researched a lot of this book in the libraries all over the Hudson Valley while my kids were having a play date or something else was going on. So it wouldn't have happened without that amazing system, and I'm very grateful. I am not currently in a book club, and that's partly because of so much reading for work. But I know if I were, and I would love to be in time again, I would need something that I could linger to enjoy every sentence in, but also I could power through in a night if I needed to, because it would probably be me on the last night reading it quickly and then wanting to have lots to discuss. So that's one quality, something super propulsive. And then I think I like the idea always in any book of a story where I know something about it. I think I've got a vague handle on the story or the subject in hand, but there's obviously much, much more to learn. And certainly that's what kept me at the story of Mrs. Benedict Arnold for so long, because I knew his name was synonymous with treason. You know, only Guy Fawkes is, you know, as famous as a sort of traitor, but how it came to pass and then the extent to which she was responsible, it just kept me thinking, you know, what was she thinking, and could she ever be forgiven? I love novels like Notes on a Scandal. That would have been a perfect kind of book club read. Like, can you forgive this woman? And that feels like a lot of juice to discuss.
I love that central question. I will steal it. If it's not already in your reading group guide, it should be. That's such a great question about Peggy. So as you might have gleaned from these intros, we are lucky to have such a real range of stories on today's panels, set in the past and the future, exploring complicated friendships and tangled sisterhoods, and each asking probing questions that linger long after the final page. So I'm thrilled to dig in a bit more on these fantastic titles and chat with these incredible authors who brought them to life. The first question that I'm going to open up for the group here is that book clubs are always fun places to come together and discuss books. Ali, you said it well, feisty discussion. And it's always nice to agree, but maybe extra fun when we don't. Do you think there's an element in your book that might be ripe for debate and that readers will have differing reactions toward? All right, Ali.
I hope so. I am getting a little bit, you know, that very early reader feedback, and it's curious to see. It's interesting to see what excites people. And this is minor spoiler. I don't really think it's a spoiler. It'll come into the conversation later, but there is like a cult aspect to my book. You know, I got to design this belief system that somebody gets very caught up in, and I had somebody tell me that like they've never understood why somebody would join a cult before, but like they get it now and like what this character is looking for. And I think that this character's journey through her belief system is really ripe for discussion and potentially debate, and like why is she doing these things. And as I was saying before, I really love writing about different perspectives. So I think there will be readers who will side with one character on one issue, some who will side with one character on another. And in particular, there's a lot of really intense mother-daughter stuff that was very, you know, fun to write and really dig into. And, you know, I'm a daughter, I'm a mother, like I get both sides. I'm trying to make it so readers can understand why everybody does what they do and why they're thinking the way they are. And I'm hoping that there will be like a strong response and people will be able to kind of relate to different characters, but they may come down on different sides about if they were forced to choose who they would side with on any particular issue.
All right, Claire.
Yeah, I also like that phrase. What was it, feisty conversation or feisty discussion? We definitely have that in our book club when we get the kind of perfect book that has kind of conflicting sides, really, and it makes the best kind of book. So I guess maybe in Hunger and Thirst, at the end of the first paragraph, there's a line, and because it's so early on in the book, I don't think it's a spoiler, where Ursula says, should she let it in or not? Or words to that effect. And so by the end of the book, you know, we kind of go back in time and we come full circle to that point, and it is almost really left on that cliffhanger, should she let it in or not? And so I would hope that maybe in a book club, people would think, if I were in that position, would I let it in? Should Ursula let it in? And then, of course, even what is it? You know, that even isn't but completely resolved at the end. I hope I'm not giving spoilers. I don't think so. So I hope that would give a really good book club element for discussion.
That's great. Emma, do you have one?
Well, I think for the people who are just interested in American history, I would wonder if the book changed their mind at all about anything that they thought they knew about the way that events had gone, who is unspeakable and who's not, who can be forgiven in that way. But even for people who wouldn't linger to consider historical fiction, I hope there are some kind of interesting questions about how much we should interfere in our partners, husbands, friends, careers, and lives anyway. Because I don't know about you, but often, like at the end of a day, you're tired, you're listening to some issue that's going on in your spouse's world, and you sort of weigh in amongst many other teeming distractions with really very little idea about what might be unleashed by that sort of intervention. And obviously, in in my novel, a lot is unleashed by her intervention for the sake of her family. So I hope there could be some fun questions about our responsibility. When is meddling meddling? When is it helpful? When is it our responsibility? When is it wrong?
Oh, wow. I feel like that could lead to a long and very feisty debate. I love that. Kyle.
Emma, I didn't think of our novels as having a lot in common, but listening to your answer, I'm realizing that a theme in my book, I think, is how we build our sense of self from the people closest to us, whether it's a partner or a sister or a parent. And I think that theme of sort of taking in someone else's opinion or taking in someone else's perception of you and what you should do also plays out in my book. And both sisters are sort of figuring out what type of artists and what type of dancers they are based on what the men around them are telling them. And I think that process of sorting out who you are and what your talents are something that we need the outside world for. And yet it can be very dangerous and tricky, especially when someone is intimately involved in our lives, maybe has other motivations. So I think there's also some questionable work advice in my novel. And I would hope that it would lead people to talk about how we build our sense of self and our sense of our world in our most intimate relationships.
Those are really great answers. I'm very excited to hear how you answer this next one because it makes me hungry. The best book clubs tend to feature drinks and snacks in addition to the discussion. Thinking about your novels, is there a particular food or drink that would be featured on your book club menu? And Allie, I know you're eager. I can.
This is my favorite question. I love this. Sugar cookies, homemade sugar cookies appear in my book multiple times. And they're all in, cosmic shapes. They're spaceships and planets, and they're key. They appear in key moments. So it's clearly there have to be sugar cookies, and with kind of the galactic themes. And this may reveal that I've been watching too many holiday baking shows recently, but like anything with a mirror glaze, just like nice and shimmery, would fit. And then the opening character, Carol, has a very complicated, her mother has passed, complicated memories of her mother, mostly very rough. But one positive thing she clings to is her mother's meatballs. And just like, so you need some protein, you got meatballs. And then there is a key moment later in the story where something big happens while a character is, quote, 3 margaritas deep. So you've got your drink right there. And now I want to have this book club.
Yes, it's like a many course meal. Emma,
Yeah.
I'm curious for this one.
Well, there is a bit of reference to her heart being won by Benedict bringing little out of season treats. So you could have any out of season treat and enjoy it, I think. But also their wedding feast is cold white wine, crisp white wine, Spanish ham, a little bit of pear tart, fizzy water. So good white wine, fizzy water, and ham.
Hair tart.
Yeah.
Sounds amazing. Kyle. Oh, you're on mute, Kyle.
There we go. Um, I'm sitting here thinking that the food and drink in my book is all the food and drink of seduction. So this may be a different direction for your book club, but there's sort of a key martini and olives that happen early on. And then there's also a sort of key pivotal scene with some oysters. So I would suggest a very salty of the sea martini, olives, and oysters for your book club.
I'm here for it. And then Claire, I saved you for last because your book is called Hunger and Thirst. Yeah.
Yeah, so it should have some really great food in it, shouldn't it, really? But it's set in the 1980s mostly, and these people are young and without much money. So they eat an awful lot of fried eggs and sausages and meat pies from tins, which I don't think is very good kind of book club food, really. And also, they do at some point eat spaghetti bolognese, but I'm not sure even about Ali's meatballs because are they good book club fodder? I'm not really sure. They're kind of messy, bolognese, meatballs, tomato
Mini
sauce,
ones
not
on
good.
sticks, little sticks ones.
Maybe just about.
You can
So
throw them
I
at each other
so
when it gets feisty too.
Yes.
Sorry.
So I'm not sure there is food despite it being called hunger, but thirst, I was thinking maybe it would be quite fun to actually invent a cocktail called Hunger and Thirst. Bit of rum, bit of sea salt, bit
Love it.
of pineapple juice, I don't know, something like that.
Yeah, it is true because even though your book is named Hunger and Thirst, I was not incredibly hungry while eating, while reading Hunger and
No.
I love that. All right. Everybody loves behind the scenes info. When writing your book, did you come across any surprising research or facts that you found sort of unexpected or that just clung to your mind? And how did this information inform your novel? And I'm going to kick it to you first, Emma.
I think one of the really fun discoveries, which I didn't find pointed out anywhere else, because it's a love triangle all the way through this book. She falls in love with one man and then another. It's impossible that they'd ever be reunited unless this sort of outlandish plan comes off. And I discovered that at the end of the book, her first love was delivered to the house where she was within an hour or two of her leaving it. So it was possible to imagine that they were passing. It had almost all come together, that all three were reunited there after this incredible adventure, but they just locked eyes and then went on their separate ways. And I just thought that felt very instinctively true, the way life mocks us by giving us these beckoning possibilities which feel like they're part of our fate, and then doing some kind of wicked, antic spin on them. And so I thought it was amazing and a bit heartrending to think how close they came then. And it just allowed me to sort of foreshadow that hope to establish how badly she would have wanted it, and what she did in order to try to effect it. Yeah. And then there was just one funny thing. There are so many parallels. There weren't that many names around in the 18th century. So you keep coming across the same name, which different characters have. And it happens in all sorts of ways. Peggy Arnold herself is one of, hundreds of them reaching back. But also her greatest nemesis turns out to share a name with the one man who will give her food when she's an absolute extremist. And that just also struck me as quite funny in a quiet way.
I love those interesting gems of research. All right, Ali, how about you?
Sure. So my book has the premise. It starts with this woman, a new mother in the 80s, who turns on the news and learns that Earth has received a message from an alien civilization 11 light years away. And then it follows her and her two kids over 50 years as messages are exchanged. So going into it, I didn't know very much at all about astronomy, and I knew that I would have to really dig into that. And especially one character grows up to pursue astronomy. So if she's going to understand it, I have to be able to write about it. And it was really intimidating at first, but I ended up going to this really amazing week-long astronomy intensive workshop for creatives called Launchpad Astronomy. And so much amazing information, so much that I was folded into the book. Like I had very specific questions that I got answered there, and it was just like just this wellspring of helpful information. And then there was just this one day random lesson about the solar cycle and how our sun, the magnetic field flips roughly every 11 years. And it was this little like, ooh, moment, because the alien civilization in my book is, situated around a star 11 light years away. And as I mentioned, there is this like cult aspect where there's this system of beliefs kind of developing around Earth's relationship with this star, and just that symmetry of the sun, the solar cycle lasting 11 years and this alien system being 11 light years away. It's total coincidence. But, in the world of this book, there's going to be someone who's like, oh, that is not coincidence. And it was just this moment I was like, ooh, this is rich. This is something I can fold into this belief system. And I got really excited. It was giving me that fodder to kind of just make this world, make this belief system a little bit richer.
That's great. Claire?
I did have to do research for this book, but a lot of it was it's not, the main character is not based on me, but she lives in a town that I lived in 1987. She lives in a house that I lived in. She becomes a very famous, successful sculptor. Not that I did that, but what was fun was really putting myself in that, inside her head, and really thinking what that would be like. So I studied sculpture. That was my first degree, but I carried on making art for many years, but I wasn't very successful. So it was amazing to write a character who could be a really, really world famous sculptor, and inhabit that person and create sculptures on the page that she creates. So she carves this bear that's lying on its back, and it has its front slit open, and sitting in what I guess is its kind of stomach or womb is a stone woman all curled up. Something I would have loved to actually create, but I could create it without actually having to do any of the work. And that was just such fun. And this sculpture wins a major award that I made up. It means that her sculpture is exhibited at MoMA and then in galleries across the world. And then she decides to put it in a Welsh forest and let it rot, which was, I could be a sculptor, a really famous sculptor for the length of a book. It was great fun.
Also, you gave us that amazing word, lithopedion, for a stone
Oh, yes.
baby. Yeah, I love that. I've never
Yeah.
heard it. And yeah.
Yeah, I did research that. I guess I had to find out a bit about that. There was some research, but there was lots of fun along the way.
I love that idea, because I think so many times as readers, you think of that the fantasy is created for you, as the reader. But I love the idea of the author living out the fantasy while writing is so wonderful. That's like a fresh way for me to think about the way
Yeah.
I work with authors. Kyle, do you want to add anything here?
Sure. I have been preoccupied with the French fairy tale Bluebeard for a long, long time, and this book came out of my obsession with Bluebeard. And Bluebeard is the story of a man his wives keep disappearing. He keeps marrying young women and then they sort of disappear. And the youngest bride wants to find out what has happened to all these other women. And I think a pivot point for me in writing this book was when I discovered the German version of this fairy tale, in which the older brides are actually older sisters, and all of the brides are from the same family. And that just cracked open the book for me, because I thought, oh, I see. The early wives, the first wife, is the older sister of my protagonist. And the other very cool thing about the German version of Bluebeard is that rather than a brother or a father saving the women, the woman saves herself. She has a bunch of tricks up her sleeves and does some magic, and some of them she dresses up in a particular way. And I think learning that a sort of older version of the fairy tale had a more active female protagonist who was protecting her sister really opened up the world of the book for me.
Right. That's great. Um, so all of your novels delve into many complex topics and emotions, but if you had to pick just one headline theme, just a single theme for your book, what would it be? Claire, do you want to start?
Yeah. I teach a lot of creative writing, and this is one of the things that I teach my students. And to teach it is relatively easy, but to come up with it for your own book is quite hard. And often it doesn't come to me until at least the end of the first draft. But I think in Hunger and Thirst, you can kind of boil it down to one word, which is belonging. And if you expanded that, then it might be what what would you do to belong? Or what's the worst you would do? Because Ursula, she grows up in care. She doesn't have a family. She doesn't really have any close friends. And she wants that. She wants a home. She wants a family. She wants friends. And ultimately, she will do the worst possible thing in order to try and get that. So, yeah, I guess belonging.
Belonging. Emma, what's your theme?
I worry that it's going to be off-putting or sound pious in some way because it's really quite a gossipy, rompy kind of novel. But basically, the biggest question is about peace. Like, what are you willing to do? What would you be willing to do for peace, actually? And it's often seen as such a sort of naive concern, even imagining that there might be anything that can be done. But I think we've all had our own kind of non-kinetic conflicts going on in the world around us for years and years and years, but thankfully, not pressing kind of military action. But if you had the deep division that we've been living with and the real threat of death for people that you love and an opportunity, a hand on the tiller to do something about it, like, yeah, what would you do? What's allowable?
Kyle?
I think my novel is a coming of age novel, actually, at its heart. I think the main theme would be who are you? And who are you without your sister? Who are you with a new man, without a new man? With the talent you thought you had, without the talent you thought you had? Who are you at your core?
Very good. And Allie?
I would say the main theme is communication. One of like kind of the central irony of this book, and one of the reasons I was really excited to write it, is that you have two civilizations 11 light years apart who are able to communicate fairly effectively, but you have, a mother and a daughter living in the same house who can't. And I love kind of that contrast and the interplay of ideas there. And when what people choose to say, what they can't get themselves to say, and how that changes throughout um, someone's life. And so, yeah, I would just say communication is probably the headline theme for mine.
Yeah, and I think that's great. And sometimes maybe this question dovetails with your answers, or maybe you go in a different path. But I'm curious if readers could take away just one thing from your book, a feeling, a question, or a lesson. What would you hope that be? And Allie, we can stay with you on that one.
Sure. I I suppose a sense of compassion and understanding, and just a little bit of a like, oh, like maybe this person who I feel like I fundamentally disagree with, like maybe I should consider their perspective a little bit more, or just, yeah, having a little bit more compassion as we move throughout the world. And hopefully a little bit of a sense of wonder. I feel like today we are just inundated with so much bad news in particular, and we get so much information that sometimes it's hard to just be like, sit in a moment of beauty or wonder. And it's so important to do that. So I think that would be what I would hope readers would take away.
And Kyle?
I think, our news headlines are sort of perpetually filled with stories of bad men and men who misbehave. And I don't think my book is some sort of apology or explanation for the man's psyche, but I do think it asks what is constructive or what is made in relationships that are mostly toxic. Um, and more than that, I think it asks why and how women reach each other um, between and sort of around those relationships, how they kind of come out of those relationships through their connections with each other.
And Emma?
I hope it would make a reader feel for a minute like they were there. What was that like to dance and flirt with Hamilton and Lafayette, to argue with George Washington, to have a mob baying for your death at your door? Like, what was it like to be there? That's what I would hope.
And Claire.
I feel really bad that everybody is saying all kind of positive things. And, and the feeling I think I want people to be left with is disquiet or being unsettled or something slightly negative. I want to disturb them and not absolutely terrify them. I'm not expecting that at all. I'm not even aiming for that, but disquiet, I think I'll go for.
I like that. All right. So these novels are all so cinematic. I swear, I feel like I watched these books as much as I read them. They just quickly grew in my mind. And I'm so curious who you would cast in your leading roles. What do you think, Allie?
This is hard. The book spans 50 years, so I feel like you would have to have multiple actors for the same character. And I'm not a visualizer. I can't visualize. So when I think about my characters, I don't see them. So I don't really have anyone particular in mind. But I had the TV on last night and there was an ad for some holiday movie with Michelle Pfeiffer. And I had this moment of, oh, she would make a great older Carol. Like, so that's the
Oh,
one
I
I'm gonna,
love her for Carol. All right, what
yeah.
do you say, Emma?
I feel I like all my references are a tiny bit out of date. Like I like the older generation that would probably get the parts now, just getting older. But I would like someone like, well, first of all, it would be really fun to mix up the kind of British and American accents a bit because no one, the accents hadn't coalesced at that time. So it might be quite fun to have very British, more British accents in the kind of classic American founder father plots. But also then it would be nice to have someone who looks really appealingly guilty as Benedict. Um, and I think of Dominic West as the most appealingly guilty looking man I can think of. So a younger version of him, super athletic.
That's so good. Claire, what do you think?
Oh, this question is so hard. Really, really hard for me. I do visualize my characters, but I don't ever see what actors would play the part. But I have kind of tried to think about it. But so maybe the older Ursula could be Helena Bonham Carter, a little bit eccentric, beautiful, but odd looking too in a great way. And then I was thinking, and then the other people I came up with are too old and actually dead, so they're not going to be any good. I came up with Shelley Duvall, who played
Oh,
Wendy Torrance in The Shining, who just has the best face. So she could be Sue in her 20s, but that would have to be Shelley Duvall alive again 40
well,
years
it's her
ago, whatever.
fantasy
So
movie. I feel like it works very well. I love that pursuit, the wide-eyed. Um,
yeah.
that's great. And then Kyle, I know you're not doing this one, but I think a lot about Black Swan, uh,
Mm.
the Aronofsky film. When I read this book so much, like I just pictured the dancers in that, and um, but also the idea of being watched and looked at and how that changes the way that your body is and moves and inhabits. And so I look forward to seeing all of these on the screen someday soon. And then I think this is our last question. And, I've already decided that all of your books are great for book clubs. And I think that they would offer so much wonderful discussion, so much uh, just feisty banter. But I'm curious from you, this is a time to champion a book that is not yours. Is there a book that you would recommend to our viewers here for their book club? Let's start with Kyle.
I just finished The Wilderness by Angela Flournoy, and it just really blew me away. And I think part of what would make this a great book, it follows four friends sort of from their late 20s, maybe into middle age. And it is the most successful integration of the personal and political that I've seen. The book slowly moves into the sort of near future and imagines a kind of police state, but at the same time, it's very, very close to the lived experience of these women's lives and having children, caring for old aging parents, parents dying, and I've never, I think that it would make a great book club book because it would allow you to both talk about what is going on in the US and also what it's like to move through that middle passage, that wilderness of middle age.
That's awesome. Allie.
I'm going to go with The Silver State by Gabriel Urza. It's about a public defender who uh, begins to think that a death row inmate that he defended years ago might be innocent. And it is just chock full of moral ambiguity and opens up a lot of questions about kind of our justice system. And it's written by an author who, clearly has experience. So feels very real and grounded. And like I said in the beginning, it had some of those lines where I just like gasped when I read them because they just hit perfectly. And then it has a little bit of a thriller edge because at the end, like it genuinely surprised me. And it was one of those books that I put it down as like, I want to talk about this. And like I feel like that's really the ultimate key that it would be good for a book club.
Right. And Emma?
I'm allowed to do clients' books, I hope, because I
Yes,
can't get
of
out
course. Of course.
But, a really good book for a January book club would be David Gutterson's new novel. It's called Evelyn in Transit, and it's based or was inspired by a true story of an American woman, single mother, who found a group of lamas, Tibetan lamas, at her door, telling her that her illegitimate son was actually the reincarnation of a revered Tibetan lama. And it then follows this woman on a sort of road trip. What does she do? Will she decide to take her child and have him raised in Tibet? How do we live a good life? What do we really feel about reincarnation? I'm not a Buddhist, and I love it when a novel gives me a chance to dwell those weeks, those hours, that time with questions. Again, I've sort of glanced at. What's the deal with reincarnation? Could there ever be a female Tibetan Dalai Lama, as the current Dalai Lama has hoped? There are big questions to consider and to talk about, and all in the most crystalline, just extraordinary prose from a storyteller who brought us Snow Falling on Cedars. It's brilliant.
Emma, I think your literary agent chops are showing because I noticed as you were talking, all of us started to write it down. So that was quite good. And I'm sure you have many more recommendations, but I'm going to ask Claire Fuller for yours.
Yeah, I did. I have written all these down, especially, knowing that David Gutterson novel is coming or has come. Yeah, that's definitely down there. I think I would suggest something that we read in our book club recently, which is The Little Stranger by Sarah Waters, which I chose for the book club. We always kind of pick a spooky book around October, November, and I've read that several times, but I chose it for the book club because I knew that lots of people hadn't read it, and it was a great book to discuss because, kind of like I'm hoping that mine might be read, you can read it at the kind of spooky level or the psychological level. It's set in the late 1940s, and it's about the Ayres family who live in a dilapidated, huge country house. They have lots of land and buildings, but really no actual money, no cash, and so everything is falling apart. And this doctor, Dr. Faraday, comes to visit them and becomes involved in the family, and very odd things start happening in the house, kind of spooky things start happening. How much is that Dr. Faraday? How much is it things that have happened in the house in the past? How much is it the things that have happened to the other characters? It's all about class and the NHS, which came in the year after. It's a really, really great book.
These are all such incredible recommendations, and all four of your novels will be so Oh, great.
I want yours, Masie, very quickly.
Oh, I wasn't expecting this, but I'll do one. I feel like Emma, since you got to do a client, I'll grab one. This I didn't do, but it's a Zando book, and it was the first one I read when joining. Hungerstone, Cat Dunn. Look at this delicious and eerie cover. And it is a feminist reworking of Carmilla. And it is so good and compulsive and chilling. It's the kind of gothic story that you just fall into and stay into. And it can be read by lots of different book clubs because it can be read, as your sort of horror pick, or it could also be read as, like a retelling. But I loved this book. So Hungerstone by Kat Dunn would be my recommendation. Thanks, Claire. I didn't know I would do that, but this was such a pleasure. Thank you all so much for being here. It was an honor spending the last hour or so talking with you. And next up, we have two concurrent panels, Falling Hard for Romanticy and Writing About Writing. So thank you for joining us and happy reading. And if everybody just quickly wants to say thank you and bye, you can hop in now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.